Brown rabbit.
The story will start in a boring summer, with a teenage employee named Jake who was trying to greet his old school friend. He was ignored and became the butt of jokes. Luckily, Jake has good friends. Her name is Shirley. Jake has a grandfather named Abe. It is said that Abe has dementia, which causes him to be forgetful. Because he was worried about Abe's condition, his grandfather, Jake, decided to come to him. Suddenly, Shirley almost hit someone in the middle of the fog covering the road. When Jake and Shirley arrived at Abe's house, Jake found something strange. Inside, the house looked messy and the door was broken. Jake thought it was from a wild animal.
Shirley!
Hearing Jake's screams, Charlie rushed over and asked what was wrong. Jake tells Charlie that his grandfather's house has been broken into. Shirley then took a gun from her car. Meanwhile, Jake went around the back of the house and found a flashlight with blood spots on it. He entered the forest and found his grandfather Abe lying down. Jake was shocked because he saw that Abe's eyes looked lost. Then the construction worker called the police, however.
Grandpa!
Abe woke up and told Jake to leave him. Abe asked Jake to go to the circle. Abe told Jake to go to an island looking for Emerson. Jake had to promise to go to the circle on September 3, 1943, and meet the bird, which would explain everything. Jake was confused about it, but suddenly it appeared behind the shadows. There is a monster that coincides with Shirley's arrival. Luckily, Jake shouted, and Shirley reflexively shot the monster. Jake is now at a psychiatrist because he was shocked by what he saw last night, together with his psychiatrist, Dr. Gallen, who told him that it was all just hallucinations, just images from films or comics. Jake tells what happened to him that it wasn't a human who killed Abe, but the police determined the scratches at the house were from dogs and Abe was attacked in his vital part. In the past, Abe often told monster stories before going to bed. There are monsters participating in the war and talented people on an island. Abe always tells extraordinary stories about talented children on an island, and he always emphasized that it was Abe's true story. On a small island near Wales, there was a head of the house misgone smoking with a stick pipe, and he can turn into a bird. There are Brownie and Victor. They are as strong as 10 adults. And Hugh, he has bees inside his body. Emma, who can float. Without shoe weights, he can float like cotton in the air. And there are many other special children. Abe also said that the reason he always moved places was because he is always chased by monsters like giant octopuses. Because he was amazed by Abe's story, which was so impressive. Jake told Abe's story in front of the class. However, his friends laughed at him. When he got home, Jake told Abe with a little disappointment. Jake now no longer believes Abe's story. Because he didn't want to grieve for a long time, Jake and his family chose to move house. That day also coincided with Jake's birthday, however. He didn't seem too enthusiastic. Jake decided to lie down on the bed, however. Aunt Susie arrives bringing a gift from the late Abe that Jake is probably looking forward to. The prize is a photo and a letter from Miss Gone. Because of this, Jake was taken to consult with Dr. Gallen. Jake wants to visit the place to find out what Abe really wants to reveal to Jake. Initially, Jake's father did not agree and thought that Jake could not differentiate between the real world and his imagination. But they left anyway. On the way to the island, Jake saw a peregrine falcon. Suddenly, Jake was immediately reminded of the head of the house, and Jake shouted for him.
Hey, Miss Peregrine!
When they arrived at the inn, they were greeted by the innkeeper and the rhoda-chair grandfather, whose glasses were quite unique. Without wasting any time, Jake immediately wanted to rush to the location that Abe had indicated, namely the House of Special Children. Because he didn't want to be alone, Jake's father offered a local teenager to take Jake to that place in exchange for money. On the way, Jake met local children who seemed to be good at whistling.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Jake was told to take a shortcut to get there quickly, but when Jake had crossed the bridge, Jake's feet fell into the mud, causing one of his shoes to disappear. They said behind the bushes was the location Jake was looking for. Because he saw the location that had been destroyed, Jake decided to return to the inn. Jake met the old grandfather, who was sitting in a wheelchair and wearing unique glasses. He told him that this place was bombed by the Germans in 1943. In fact, that day, Jake told his father what he saw, with a little annoyance. Jake was not satisfied with what he saw. In the morning, Jake explained to his father that he wanted to hang out with the local kids, but which is actually Jake visiting the place again and finding out what's inside. Jake finds photos of special children. There was a clock lying covered with leaves. It seems that the abandoned house has no life activity in it, however. Jake was shocked by the appearance of a woman, and he saw a flash of a shadow which frightened him. The sound of very big footsteps on the roof of his house. Because of this, Jake ran away in fear. When he regained consciousness, a strange thing happened. Jake was carried by a small child. Jake found the children he was looking for. He quickly said their names. Jake memorized them because he repeated Abe's story every time he wanted to sleep. Jake was invited to enter the circle. Whether he was afraid or wanted to tell his father, Abe quickly ran into the inn. But something strange happened again. When Abe wanted to go up to the inn, he was actually scolded by the people there because Jake was rude. Because he just went in, Jake was confused because he was accused of being an American spy, confused about what was happening when suddenly, the plates and glasses bounced by themselves and caused chaos. Jake was pulled, and when the special child touched the wall, fire immediately came out which caused the building to catch fire. It seemed that warplanes typical of the Second World War appeared in the sky, and without asking too much, Jake followed them using a horse-drawn carriage. Jake tells them that they died in 1943 because of a bomb dropped by the Germans, but Emma explains that they are still alive, and they are now in a circle, which causes the incident throughout the day to repeat itself over and over again. Finally, Jake met the head of the house, Miss Peregrine, who invited Jake in so that his tea wouldn't get cold. Jake gets straight to the point that Abe wants Miss Peregrine to explain everything. In the garden, there is a special child named Fiona who can speed up the regeneration of plants to make them bigger or grow faster. Miss Peregrine said that all the children here are special children who are called Den Han Peculiars. Meanwhile, Miss Peregrine is a peculiar nicknamed Imberin, where he can set the time circle to 24 hours to repeat his daily life and live eternally in it, which continues to repeat itself. The big carrot was carried by Brownie. Even though his body was small, he had the strength of 10 adults. Jake was taken on a tour of the park and introduced other peculiarities. There are the twins and Claire. There is Hugh, who has bees, and Mild, who is invisible. Meanwhile, this one is Horace. He really likes nice and neat clothes. There was Emma, who was holding a rope and looked at her watch, and it turned out that there was a squirrel jumping which Emma happened to catch. He told Jake to hold the rope, and Emma immediately wrapped the rope while Abe held the rope. Emma asks how Abe is, and Jake explains that Abe has died. It turns out that Emma had expected it earlier. Upstairs, Jake is told to meet Enoch. He was fixing the doll and putting a heart into it. Suddenly, the dolls came to life and fought with each other. Dinner arrived. All the peculiars gathered together and chatted with each other. Except for Anug, who doesn't seem to like Jake's presence here. This was ignored, and they continued eating dinner. To the point where he forgets Enoch again, and again insinuates Jake's presence, which makes Emma angry. Jake is offered to live in this house with the other peculiars. However, Mrs. Peregrine asked permission for a moment to answer the telephone. Apparently, it was a telephone call from Abe, who was still young, and time kept repeating itself. In the evening, they watched the big screen with Horace's ability, whose ability was about dreams, most of which were clothes and most of which were predictions that would not be missed. Miss Peregrine turns it off and rushes out to see the big thing. This is the process of reversing time so that time continues to run for the past 24 hours, or can be called a circle. Because otherwise this house would be destroyed by a German bomb. This happens every day. Peregrine also managed to turn back time to 24 hours earlier. Jake took the letter from inside the house and put it in his pocket. Jake decides to go back to meet his father. Don't forget to take a selfie with Emma. Emma found a strange sound, and it turned out to be a yimbrin bird similar to the Lady Peregrine. When Jake was out of the circle, he met his father, who has been looking for him since morning. Jake and his father meet a local farmer and children, which says that the brand's livestock has died. When Jake arrived at the inn, he saw Emma's photo and opened Mrs. Peregrine's letter from Abe. What turned out to be inside was a letter notifying him about circles in England. In the morning, Jake was invited by his father to go to the beach. There they met a photo photographer who was watching birds. Because they were uncomfortable with this, they returned to the inn. When Jake's father fell asleep, Jake first escaped through the stairs, but the innkeeper kept an eye on Jake, so he escaped through the window and back into the circle. Jake then told the letter he'd taken yesterday and told it to Miss Peregrine, which made her angry. Jake then asked about Abe, about what Abe really wanted Jake to know about the truth that Miss Peregrine was hiding, but Miss Peregrine refused. Anug and Olive heard the conversation, and they were going to tell him what Abe was really hiding. But before that, Jake had to get to know Victor. Jake greets him, but he can't hear because he's dead. Anug also adds his skill in the form of a toy heart that can revive Victor. In less than a few minutes, Jake was already running away in fear. Jake also asked Emma who killed Victor. Emma told Jake that the person who killed Victor was a person with white eyes. Jake also saw that on the night of Abe's murder, Jake saw a person with white eyes. Emma takes Jake to a place that will tell Jake one thing. Jake saw Emma swimming, and suddenly he followed her to the bottom of the ocean. Emma has a special ability, namely controlling air. They entered a ship that had been sunken for hundreds of years. Emma immediately shot out air to drain the seawater in the room. In the box, there are several documents inside which tell the peculiars who are conducting experiments to live eternally by taking the eyes of other special children. Emma also told Jake that he was also a peculiar or special child who had abilities. Miss Peregrine will create a time loop where September 3, 1943 is the day the creature that killed Victor came back, making time repeat itself. Emma tells Jake that children with abilities can only see him. Because of this, Miss Peregrine explained that Jake was a capable child. In fact, in the past, Abe wanted to keep this a secret. He wanted Jake to live a normal life like other children. The peculiars want to live forever, so they do experiments, but the effect is that they become invisible. Eating the eyes of special children, they return to human form, which is the reason why the monsters chase other special children. Olive also informed him that the other Miss Avocet Imbrine had regained consciousness, and informs him that the peculiars have discovered Miss Avocet's time circle. Because of this, they will pack up and look for a safer shelter, but Jake is adamant about going home to his father. While outside the circle, Jake met his father, who told him that his grandfather had died with a missing eye. Jake then ran and rushed to report it, but someone followed Jake into the circle. Jake is chased by a photographer who is watching birds on the beach. It turns out that it is a strange, evil leader called the Baron. He is looking for a time circle that is difficult to find. The Baron turns into Dr. Gallen, who turns out to be the Baron. He puts his hand, which turns into a knife, around Jake's neck to guide him to meet Mrs. Peregrine.
Shall we?
On the other hand, when the other peculiar children were packing up to evacuate, they were shocked by the sound of a bell, which turned out to be Jake, who was being held captive. Mrs. Peregrine ordered them to go into the room and offered herself to replace Jake, on condition that he didn't hurt the children. Mrs. Peregrine turned into a bird and went into the cage. Mrs. Amber also ordered the children to lock the windows, cover the doors with chairs, and prepare to hold their weapons. Meanwhile, Abe's phone rang asking for Mrs. Peregrine. He didn't realize that it was his own grandson Jake who answered the phone. Jake expressed his pride in Abe and apologized if he disappointed him. Meanwhile, Mrs. Amber was suddenly explaining. Other children can't see the hollow except Jake, who can see it. Enough was pulled and almost had his eyes taken out for Jake to shoot him so they could run to the attic. Time was running out, so the repetition would start soon, and they had to hurry so as not to be bombed by German planes. They all escaped through the window with Fiona's strength to bring the tree closer for them to climb down. The repetition of time has disappeared. Now they are confused about it. Jake suggested they go to the black pool, but time was running out because they weren't in the circle. Jake suggests using a boat. Using Emma's power to control the air, the sunken boat was successfully raised. Olive lit the fireplace to make the engine move using her skills. Emma tells Jake that he has to go to his time in 2016, and they have to kill Baron so that time continues and Abe stays alive. They arrived at the time circle near the harbor in the playground. Jake and Emma enter the headquarters of the evil peculiars by sneaking around and daring them to come to the playground. Jake returns to the amusement park port, but Emma gets stuck and almost gets hit by an electric train. It turns out that Jake and the other kids have planned something. Inug awakens the skeletons in the ship, while the other children throw snowballs and candy at the hollow monsters to make them visible and easy to attack. A battle ensued. The Skull Dolls managed to defeat several hollows and Brownie through a toy horse that had pointy horns which made the hollows go into the sea. Emma immediately blew on Baron, making him stick to the wall, hugely taking out the beast. Nog stupidly stepped forward without warning and was immediately knocked down by Baron. Olive managed to set Baron's shirt on fire, but it wasn't enough.
Not your peculiarity.
Meanwhile, Brownie is pulled into the water and frozen. Luckily, Fiona managed to catch the evil peculiar with a rope seed from her plant. Emma again and again blows on Baron so that he sticks to the wall, but Emma also has limits in this regard, while Jake rushes into the room and frees the Embrines. On the other hand, Olive was successfully frozen by an evil peculiar, but luckily the Inug elephant doll saved Olive. And it turns out the twins have the power to change the stones of people they see. Emma was out of breath, and Baron headed to the door where the Embrines were locked up. He broke it using an axe that came from his skill. Luckily, the Embrines were released, and Jake told them to make a nest and look after the other strange children. When Jake wanted to be killed, luckily Emma called his name. But when Enough and Emma came in, they were confused because there were two Jakes inside. One is Jake and the other is a fraud or fake. Jake also managed to convince them because he can see the hollow monster that no one else can see except Abe and Jake. The hollow monster thinks Baron is Jake and takes Baron's eyes. Finally, they went home and Jake went back to Florida to meet Abe and tell him. Jake also told everything, including Abe, who was killed, and Jake, who had lost his friends. Abe also gives money to Jake to travel around the world looking for the location of the time circle. Okay, happy ending. Jake managed to find several time circles and was able to meet Emma again.